Oh, hello my friends, hope you are well. We've been making some decent progress on our kitbashed Swamperial Guard army recently, but we do need to start introducing some more infantry into the ranks. And today, we're doing just that by whipping up our very first swampy heavy weapon squad.
Swamp Rip. Miniatures.
The lore of this army tells us that the larger, more humanoid-sized green boys are more intelligent and therefore receive the more important combat roles. So I'm starting with a few very simple kitbashes here, of one larger boy to lead the way on each team. I kept these very similar to the box art crews as I want to reflect their increased combat capabilities through their more soldierly appearance compared to the goofy styles we use on our smaller green boys. And if you possess your own visual capabilities, you will have noticed I've been mixing in these slightly wonky green stuff helmets. I've been playing around behind the scenes with the good old blue stuff molding method, as my stockpiles of the older Imperial Guard parts have been running lower than a marathon through a limbo. And I haven't quite perfected them yet. They're definitely, you can see they're a bit rough around the edges still. But as far as salvage gear for our green boys goes, these should work pretty well and allow me to keep mixing in my favoured chunkier style of old Imperial Guard gear. Now, before we start building, a couple of quick complaints about the current heavy weapons squad. Each of the weapon variants incorporate this same one stand, while the older kits had different types, so you could end up making more than one squad from each box. So I'm going to use these leftover mortar stands from the old kit, allowing me to create another squad of las cannons or bazooka boys in the future with these new ones possibly. James' Workshop has also decreased the base size of the heavy weapons teams in the latest edition, so you can see here we don't actually have a great deal of space to work with, which is tricky as we love to make our swampy bases all funky, kind of like mini dioramas, but I love a challenge and I'm excited to see how much I can cram onto these compared to the regular old box art ones. So let's get into the first build. I decided I'd need to add an element of verticality on these bases to really maximise the amount of floor space we've got. So for the first one, I cut a recess into this miscellaneous foam blob shape and shoved my tube into it to act as some environmental concealment and give me the extra floor space up top. To keep this baby on brand, we're going with our tried and tested swampification process, adding a nice tangle of swampy mangrove style roots all over the shop first, then adding a scrappy wooden platform for our small green boy to stand on. I also added a few little bracing pieces of wood around the mortar dugout for extra detail, and it was looking alright at this point, but when I tested out the placement for our Voxcaster green boy, it felt like that time I was born with a tail because something just wasn't quite right, and it needed something extra to kind of frame him in. So I whacked on another chunk of XPS foam that I'd carved into a rotten tree stump shape and used a bit more hot glue to add some rooty bits that would help to blend everything together. This looked a lot better and everything made sense again, so I could now kitbash one of our smaller green boys to fill the second position in the mortar team, using another combination of Gretchen, Imperial Guard and my wonky moulded green stuff parts to create this happy little scamp who came together surprisingly well, if you can overlook the fact that the mortar shell is as aerodynamically shaped as a sack of potatoes. Irregularly shaped mortar shells aside though, I felt satisfied with our first base, so I covered the entire thing with Daddy's special mud mixture as always to give everything some extra rigidity and a more interesting surface texture. Then I shoved in a couple of mushrooms for good measure, as I enjoy the little burst of colour they give when everything's painted. The second of our bases started off much the same as the previous one, with another lump of XPS foam going down first, followed by two coffee stirrer bracing pieces on top. I added these as I wanted to build up a kind of trench floor effect like I did in a recent basing video I'd made, and these boards allowed me to attach my scrappy duck boards using super glue, which would have otherwise just dissolved the foam. I use a variety of chopped up coffee stirrers and matchsticks for this floor to sell the improvised effect, and once they're all in place, I give them a good scratching up using my hobby knife to get them looking rougher than me on a Monday morning when I scramble out of bed to put the bin out in time for collection. I glued the mortar down next so I could work my remaining details around it without blocking its position later. And if you had more roots on your Swamp Rat bingo card for this episode, then congratulations, you just won a bingo, baby. Your prize will be the apple seeds I swallowed by accident this morning. We're just waiting for them to make a reappearance. The final details for this base included another little platform up top here for our small green boy to stand on, with some extra hot glue to blend it in, and a couple of larger mushrooms shoved in for good measure. Then again, I cobbled together another smaller green boy, this time going for a kind of double mortar shell wielding tiny maniac who didn't need too many alterations. I was able to kind of make this work with an existing Gretchen pose, and he came out looking pretty good as well, if I do say so myself. And if you want to give him a name, then comment it down below so I can get his birth certificate sent off. So the second base was looking pretty good now too. We've got a nice mixture of trench and kind of swamp warfare stuff going on, and once it's received its mandatory muddy coating, we were on to our final build. For this one, I'd left another little tree stump shaped nodule poking out of the foam, and of course it's getting more chunky wire and hot glue gun roots for good measure, as well as an extra little bit around the upper edge to thicken it out. I ended up removing a bit more foam on the bottom too to create a slight recess, as I thought adding some water in here later would be a nice touch. Then I slapped a couple of wooden bracing pieces on top to support the mortar. I made a slightly larger indent over here for our big binocular boy to kneel down in, and once I had him situated, I went about adding a small row of sandbags that I'd made using some milliput and a spoonful of my love, but mainly just the milliput. Some of the stitching bits on the side got kind of squished in the process though, so I made sure to reinforce those with my pokey little knife, and I had a few left over, so I thought we'll chuck them onto the other bases as an extra little detail, and I think they actually did add quite a nice little touch to them, so yeah, good shit. All I needed to do now to finish this bad boy off was the sloppy mud mixture and a few more shroomy boys. And with that, my friends, all of our bases were now completed. And I was actually quite happy with them, to be honest. We've used the same components across all three pretty much, but we've mixed them up in such a way that each has its own kind of unique thing going on too, and they're going to look a lot more interesting than the plain old flat bases you see on the heavy weapons squad box up. So we are quids in, baby. The light of the swamp frog has shown us the way, and it's time for painting. I'll fly through this pretty fast again today, as I think we've seen it enough times already in this project, which is kind of the biggest downside in making videos about an army build like this, is obviously I want my boys to all kind of match up and have a nice recognizable color palette going on across each individual miniature, but yeah, we're seeing a lot of the same painting, to be honest. There will be a bunch of units that have more interesting and unique paint jobs, like the bombast cannon snail hybrid thing we made a while ago, which was a ton of fun to paint and has some pretty bold colors going on, so I'm looking forward to some more builds like that. But for these kind of regular infantry builds, it's unlikely that our color palette is going to shift dramatically. There are still things we will be experimenting with in the future though, like I really want to perfect my painted wood recipe, as I think it comes out looking decent on these builds, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, so I'll be playing around with that in the future. And I've also got my eyes on some similar kind of products to the dirty down moss and swampy goo stuff I use quite regularly, so we can try those out and see how they compare to our current choices. If you've got any product recommendations though, let me know, as I'm always looking for new things to play around with. And like I said, I'm especially interested in the magic kind of cheat juices we use, like streaking grime and dirty down rust, or anything else that's going to help us get some really gnarly looking units without having to invest too much time or effort. Anyway, I'll finish these bases off with some foliage and whatnot in a moment, but first, let's paint up our green boys, and I feel like you're probably sick to death of me rambling on by now, so f*** it, throwback montage. Woo! There we go. Now, if you've recovered from the pure adrenaline injection you've just had straight into your brain hole, we're going to finish this build off with our usual collection of leafy greens and plant life. I like our swamp scene to look quite crazy and overgrown, but I don't want to obscure any of the details we've added, so I try to exercise a little bit of restraint here at least, as you know how it goes, just the right amount of foliage being well pruned adds like 2 inches to your details. My very final touch was to add a little splash of water into the recesses on this sandbaggy base, just making that feel a bit more damp and swampy. And then I thought, it again, I'll just chuck some of the other two as well, because why not? With that, our units were completed and it was time to see how they came out. So my friends, there we have it, the beginning of a much needed infantry infusion into our Swamperial Guard army. We still barely have any, relatively speaking. I do want to pump up our infantry numbers to something like 100 or so miniatures, so we've got a lot more to come, although I'm probably only going to show the unique units being built in videos, as it's going to get quite repetitive otherwise. I'd like to do some Green Boy Catachan fighters soon, as I think the Catachan are actually a really viable tabletop unit in this edition, surprisingly, and I'm working on some ideas to get them looking all green and groovy. So yeah, the next installment of the Swamperial Guard could be some Catachan conversions, it could also be the next Lore diorama, or it could be a Chimera build that I'm actually really pumped about, but who knows, wait and see. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment. Let me know down below which of the three teams is your favourite, and let me know what your favourite kind of soup is now that winter is around the corner. As always though, I have been your friendly neighbourhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya!